This is a Bioscope camera manufactured by Charles Urban's Warwick Trading Company. In 1903, around the time this camera was manufactured, more than 1 billion people had yet to see a moving image. At the end of the 19th century, movies had just begun. It has grown and continues to grow to this day and well into the foreseeable future. Today, moving images are amazing. They're present in nearly everything in our lives. They're in motion picture theaters, televisions, computers, tablets, jumbotrons at sports stadiums, rock concerts, and even in our mobile phones. We can see this gradual process of change starting with the very origins of cinema. In the near future, we'll be seeing moving images through implants. Video game 3D digital images that are created today don't really exist in some tangible way. They're wonderfully magic. Even more magic than the images created by this camera at the turn of the 20th century. But both are so amazingly connected. This video is a salute to this camera, Thomas Edison, Lumiere brothers, and especially Charles Urban and Alfred Darling and everyone in the motion picture industry before 1904. Experimenting with 70 years of still photography brought about moving photography. It was the fascination of the technology and not the subject matter that first took the world by storm. That's all. That's it. The absolute birth of the movie started with just cameras. There were no movie scripts, no movie stages, no movie studios, no movie executives, no movie stars, directors, editors, grips, gaffers, no agents. In reality, no movie business at all. But there were cameras. Movie cameras. Wonderful things that actually made living pictures. This is one of those cameras. Its birth is around 6 or 7 years after the first movie screening on December 28th of 1895. This camera was there at nearly the very beginning. It's from the ragged edge of the beginning of movies, and I'm thrilled to be its custodian. This camera is worthy of being on permanent display in any museum in the world. Now, the American Charles Urban started in the movie business with a Nickelodeon parlor in Detroit in 1894. He first introduced his Bioscope projector in 1897. And he went on to become general manager of the movie-making Warwick Trading Company in London in 1898. The Warwick Trading Company already had an extensive movie catalog by 1899 and stated all their film subjects were shot with their Bioscope camera. Largely forgotten, Charles Urban is one of the most significant and prolific motion picture Genesis generation people. Charles Urban was the producer of millions of feet of film in his career. It was some of the most spectacular film of his time. It was Charles Urban that convinced the Lumiere brothers to convert to using Edison film perforations in their cameras. He could see the future more than almost any one of his contemporaries. Just as an example, here are 2 Lumiere brothers quotes. Louis Lumiere said, "The cinema is an invention without a future." And Auguste Lumiere said, "Our invention can be exploited for a certain time as a scientific curiosity, but apart from that, it has no commercial future whatsoever." Alfred Darling, the gifted camera engineer, manufactured the Warwick Trading Company Bioscope cameras. This is a Bioscope camera manufactured between late 1902 and early 1904. And you can see Alfred Darling's logo stamped in several places in this camera. There are very few cameras that are as historically important to the motion picture industry as this one is. Movies, no one had ever done this before. These people had no preconceptions of how it was done before, because it hadn't been done before. In 1903, Charles Urban and Alfred Darling were dreaming and imagining what could be done with this new technology. About 70 years later, it's very similar to the dreaming and imagining done by Steve Jobs and Wozniak. The Warwick Trading Company and Charles Irwin made their first Bioscope cameras in 1899. From 1902 to 1904, they sold this better engineered Alfred Darling camera at their Warwick Court address. Almost all movies were about 90 feet in length, and an exhibitor just purchased the movies outright instead of renting them. The Warwick Trading Company catalog of 1899 listed such titles as Dog at the Beach, and Feeding the Chickens, and Happy Children at the Zoo. They made 358 movies in 1899. Under Charles Urban, the Warwick Trading Company grew so huge that other producers asked that they distribute movies for them. Producers just wanted to concentrate on production and let someone else do the sales. Now, after studying the makers of these early movies for many years, I've come to the conclusion that these people were seeking out the adventure of the new direction of photography. They were simply trying to work out what in the world to do with it. Without really knowing it, they took the 70-year-old process of photography and turned it into the 20th century's crowning glory of storytelling. At no prior time in 100,000 years of human history have storytellers been able to entertain and enthrall billions of people with moving images. All of this had its very beginning with Alfred Darling, Charles Urban, and their Bioscope camera. Alfred Darling has the distinction of being the very first person to sell a motion picture camera to the public. His camera shot the majority of movies before 1905. This camera worked at the very beginning of an amazing watershed period in human history. Being a caretaker for this camera is something akin to having one of the very first printing presses. As we get deeper and deeper into the digital age, movie cameras from the turn of last century become more and more valuable and more scarce. Cameras from before 1905 are exceedingly rare. Many people want to buy and display a Mickey Mouse ear movie camera. It's about the look, but having an exceptionally rare camera that was made years before the first Mickey Mouse ear camera would actually be a much better prize to have. Having such technical ingenuity in the flesh is a more profound and humbling experience. Now we come to the fun part of the video, the camera demonstration. This Bioscope camera had a long career. It worked long enough for them to upgrade to a little bit more modern lens. And it's what we would call a super speed lens. This is an f1.9. And this is what the inside of the camera looks like. And this is what it looks like when it's running. Early cameras had 3 positions for the crank. And you just take the crank off and you put it down here, and the camera will shoot time lapse. And then over here, the camera shoots in reverse. And this is the footage counter, and Alfred Darling's logo is printed right on the paper in the footage counter. Now we're going to talk about the inside of the camera and the film boxes. Now this is the top film box. That's where your unexposed neg goes. And it's held in place with a tie-down screw. You undo the screw and you can just take this film box right out of the camera. And then you thread the film, comes out and goes through this process here. It comes to this area where you open the film gate, the pressure plate, thread your film, close that back up, close this up, and then pull this plug out, and you look in the end of that hole to get focus. You focus right on the film. And then once you have focus, put your light plug back in, and your film's threaded. That's the bottom tie-down screw for the bottom fill box. And this is what it looks like when it's running. So this is a really early gearhead. One crank does the tilt, and the other crank does the pan. And if you wanted to do reset your camera, you dropped it out of gear and you could rotate the head quickly and then put the gear back in place, and then you could crank again. One of the tricks was that the cameraman was cranking the camera. So unless you had a 3-armed cameraman, somebody else had to do the panning and tilting for him.